So now that we've talked a bit about what terminal operations are in streams in general, let's start diving into some examples of terminal operations. And we'll start with one of the simplest ones, which is the forEach terminal operation. If you recall, the forEach operation doesn't return a value, and we're going to showcase forEach in the context of the Hamlet program that we looked at before. So forEach is an example of a terminal operation that does not return any value at all, at least not directly. You can have side effects, however. And if you take a look at the EX12 example in my GitHub repository, you'll see a bunch of example variants of forEach that are showcased here, and they all look kind of like this. The way that, just to recap, the way that this works is we take an array of character names in Hamlet. We get rid of anybody that doesn't start with lowercase or uppercase h. We then consistently capitalize everything. Then we sort the results so that they're sorted. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to use the forEach terminal operation to print the results. And what forEach takes in this case is a method reference, which is going to be treated as a consumer, and it's going to consume the contents that have made it that far in the stream. So remember, we've got Horatio and Hamlet will make it that far, and they'll be sorted and consistently capitalized. Println is the method reference that we're going to pass in that's going to actually consume the results. What's interesting about forEach is it expects the method reference that it's passed to have a side effect. Most of the other parts of streams don't want side effects. In fact, that's intentional. You don't want to have side effects because that perturbs the whole concurrency hazard, the thing we talked about before. But for forEach, you want to pass a method that has a side effect. So obviously, excuse me, printing is a side effect. It's having the side effect of writing the results to the output, the standard output. You could also pass other methods that have side effects as well. So here's an example where we're going to make ourselves a list of strings called results, and we're going to allocate that to be an array list. And then you'll see here that we're going to pass in the add method to results as the consumer for forEach. And that also will have the side effect of storing the element at the next location in the list. However, using forEach in this manner is very tricky. It requires the programmers to initialize the results object. So if you take a look at the results object, you can see how if we fail to initialize it, if we just say list string results, semicolon, then it won't be initialized. And when we use add, chaos and insanity will ensue because it'll try to be adding something on an object that doesn't exist or has not been initialized. So we'll come back later when we talk about collect, and you'll see there's a much better way to do this. But this is one way to do things. Another problem with using forEach in this manner is if you change your stream to be a parallel stream, which you can trivially do just by putting .parallel somewhere in the chain before you hit the terminal operation, then we're going to have all kinds of crazy race conditions because we'll have multiple threads calling add on a list which is not synchronized. So that will cause other problems. We don't want to do that. That's kind of the danger of using methods with side effects. Of course, we could solve that problem by replacing the use of a list with a concurrent linked queue, and that would work, but now, boy, is that convoluted, and it's not all that efficient. So we've added synchronization in places that didn't really need to have synchronization. So while this code will be correct, it doesn't really get the job done from other characteristics like it's non-intuitive, it's error-prone, and it's inefficient. There's another terminal operation that doesn't return a value either, and this is called forEachOrdered. And forEachOrdered is useful if you want to present the results in so-called encounter order. So what the heck is encounter order? Encounter order is just the order in which the original data was seen by the stream. So in this particular example, encounter order would be Horatio, followed by Laertes, followed by Hamlet, and so on. Now, in this particular case, it doesn't make any sense to try to preserve encounter order because we sorted the array. So what was the point of trying to preserve encounter order? So using the forEachOrdered wouldn't be useful here at all, and it actually makes things slower regardless. So it's really only useful if you have parallel streams, and again, in this case, because we have sorted, it doesn't make much sense So you probably wouldn't need to use forEachOrdered unless there's an important reason why you want the results to show up in the same order that you saw them originally, and if you don't sort them. So I'm mentioning forEachOrdered just because it's another example of a terminal operation that does not return a value, but in general, you probably want to stay away from this as much as you possibly can, and stick with the next grouping of terminal operations we're about to talk about. So that gives a quick overview of forEach. I typically don't use forEach for very much except writing little example programs to demonstrate stuff where I print the results. So that's about the most useful way you can apply forEach or forEachOrdered, just for test programs. There's almost always better ways of doing things without using forEach and forEachOrdered, but I wanted to cover them because they're very simple to understand.